Welcome to the lucky 13th episode of The Kyle Olson Show. I'm going to do my best today to string a few coherent sentences together, which sadly is probably the same thing presumptive Democrat nominee for President Joe Biden says before he appears in front of a camera.
And I was hospitalized for a while, a long time ago, with an aneurysm.
This was Joe Biden speaking during a live stream with SEIU, the union that represents a whole lot of hospital workers. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who doesn't struggle to remember the word aneurysm, especially when they had an aneurysm and emergency surgery in 1988? Here's how he described his hospital stay.
And I had a nurse nurses at Walter Reed Hospital who would bend down and whisper in my ear. Wow. And go home and get me pillows. They would make sure they'd actually, probably nothing ever taught in, you can't do it in the COVID time, but they'd actually breathe in my nostrils to make me move, to get me moving.
Is it standard practice for nurses to breathe into the nostrils of a patient to get them to move? What is he, a dog? Or this, the dominating topic of the year.
To find ourselves in a position for COVID-9, including 830 Wisconsin.
Who among us hasn't called it COVID-9 or COVID-900? I remember just last week I caught myself calling it COVID-9000. Thank goodness I'm not running for president. Here's more from Biden's live stream with SEIU.
Trump has done in going his spreading of racism, the way he deals with people based on the color of their skin, their national origin, where they're from, is absolutely sickening. No sitting president has ever done this. Never, never, never. No Republican president has done this. No Democratic president. We have racists, and they've existed. They've tried to get elected president. He's the first one that has.
Joe Biden will say anything and do anything to get elected. Joining up with Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, both self-proclaimed socialists, to write his platform is proof of that. But maybe Joe Biden needs a little history lesson. I'm sure he's heard of the 28th president, Woodrow Wilson. Old Joe might have been alive during his administration. I don't know. Wilson, a progressive Democrat, was referred to by that right-wing rag, The Atlantic, as, quote, racist. In June, Princeton University decided to strip Wilson's name from its public policy school. Here's a quote. The trustees conclude that Woodrow Wilson's racist thinking and policies make him an inappropriate namesake for a school or college whose scholars, students, and alumni must stand firmly against racism in all its forms. That's Joe Biden's fellow Democrat, Woodrow Wilson. Here's a headline from July 6th at the New Republic. Woodrow Wilson was even more racist than you thought. The guy showed a movie in the White House called Birth of a Nation, which the New Republic described as, quote, over the top in its glowing portrayal of the Ku Klux Klan. Joe Biden, spare us the moral lectures on racism when that was the basis of your political party's founding. During a fundraiser this week, Joe Biden told supporters that he thinks President Trump will try to, quote, steal the election by arguing that mail-in ballots don't work. Yes, the guy who votes by mail, Donald Trump, he votes absentee, thinks that mail-in ballots don't work. Biden wasn't done. He said he thinks Trump will say they're, quote, not real, they're not fair. My reaction to this is similar to if a nurse was blowing air into my nostrils. This is not the first time he's said such a thing. He told The Daily Show the same thing in June. He thinks Trump will try to steal the election. In April, Biden claimed that Trump is going to try to delay the election. I don't know how he would do that, since that's slightly, just slightly, unconstitutional. But who needs to worry about the practical details? Sadly, Biden isn't the only one who thinks like this. Listen to this montage of cable news talking heads and members of Congress, yes, members of Congress, saying such things, put together by Tom Elliott from Grabian News.
I think we were looking at potentially a trial run for a kind of a genuine attempt to through intimidation and potentially through force to try to steal this election.
If he loses, and I expect that he will, we have to be prepared for things that this nation has never faced before. And unfortunately, that could involve the use of, these forces.
It has been suggested that this is a trial run for the President of the United States, who may be organizing to not accept what happens when we have the election.
I think we should all take very seriously the prospect that this is, as I say, a dress rehearsal, a trial run.
You don't draw a line in the sand. This country may be looking down the barrel of martial law in the middle of an election.
This is, I guess, the president's own version of martial law, since the real military has kind of pushed back from doing that.
Is there anybody, having watched Donald Trump for the last 3.5 years, who doesn't think that Donald Trump would try to employ martial law if he thought it was the only way he could stay in power? I ask you, Joe, is there anybody who's sensible who comes on this show who doesn't think that that's possible?
Joe Biden told us this week that Gretchen Whitmer is still on his short list for vice president. A surprise, given that prominent Democrats, whatever that means, said she was lopped off from the list back in June. Speaking of Gretchen Whitmer, she and Republican legislators in Lansing negotiated a budget deal this week after they determined they were short a mere $2.2 billion. See, when you close the economy and order workers, literally the taxpayers, to stay home, suddenly the government doesn't have any money to spend. Funny how that works. So on Wednesday, the governor issued an executive order, 2020-155, which means that was her 155th executive order, to cut $115 million from the Michigan State Police budget, $392 million from the Department of Corrections, and over $36 million from the Department of Health and Human Services. So she cut $115 million from the state police, which some might say is defunding the police. But then she replaced a portion of those funds, $107 million, with funds from the federal coronavirus stimulus bill. Now, by my math, I went to a government school, I admit, 115 minus 107 is 8. So she cut $8 million. The Mackinac Center, for whatever reason, didn't like this narrative that grew that said that the governor was defunding the police. And this is something that I wrote about at Breitbart. This is from David Gunther from the Mackinac Center. He said, a dishonest narrative has started to spread in the last 24 hours, in some instances by people who should know better, about Governor Gretchen Whitmer defunding the Michigan State Police and Michigan Department of Corrections. No such defunding occurred. He goes into this example because he thinks that the average person can't understand Michigan legislature speak. And so he ended his piece by saying the extent of slicing and dicing of selectively edited information to morph yesterday's actions into a police defunding narrative is well out of bounds. Critics of her policies and actions diminish their ability to hold her accountable when they are not measured and don't confine themselves to verifiable facts. The mainstream media joined the Mackinac Center in defending Governor Whitmer. But here's the dirty little secret they're not telling you. All of this shuffling around of money, state money, federal money, is for this fiscal year. That's why I just talked about those dates. That's to fix the catastrophic problems for this year. Next fiscal year, which starts in 10 weeks, has a $3 billion hole. And all indications are that the the schools, are the loudest ones with their hand currently out, so the chances of the feds bailing out the states again are slim to none. So Gretchen Whitmer's $115 million cut will stand and likely won't have any of the federal money to, quote, backfill it, as they like to say. What's the Mackinac Center and the mainstream media going to do, or what are they going to say then? I'll be waiting. But I won't hold my breath. This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back with Matt Boyle of Breitbart News. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. So there are 31 congressional districts in America held by Democrats that Donald Trump won in 2016. Republicans need a net gain of 20 seats to win back the majority in the U.S. House. We'll be talking to a candidate who intends to win back one of those districts in a bit, but first I'm joined by Matt Boyle, Washington political editor for Breitbart News. So Matt, for some time, Republicans seem confident about at least having a shot at taking back the majority, but how do things stand now?
Yeah, look, for Republicans to retake the House of Representatives, they need to flip a net 17 seats from Democrat control back into Republican hands. And there are 30 districts across the country right now that are currently held by Democrats that are seats that President Trump won in 2016. 13 of those districts, President Trump won by 6% or more. There are really solid candidates emerging as we're kind of ending the primary season. There's still a few states left to go out there across the country, and we're entering general election season. So the Republicans feel very confident as they look at their candidate field across the country, whether it be Yvette Herrell down in New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District, Burgess Owens in Utah's 4th Congressional District, Jim Bognett in Pennsylvania's 8th, Sean Parnell out in Pennsylvania 17th in the western part of the state, who's running against Connor Lamb there. So there's a really solid crop of Republican candidates emerging around the country. The Democrats have more money though, so the Democrats are going to have the Republicans outgunned. The question is, how well does President Trump do at the top of the ticket? And then if Republicans if the Republicans are able to ride a Trump wave again, so if the president is able to perform at or near where he did in 2016, then the Republicans feel confident with these solid candidates that have emerged from the primaries, that they would be able to flip the necessary at least 17 seats back into Republican hands. In addition to those 30 districts out there that Democrats control that Trump won, there's another 20 or so that Republicans believe are competitive. So I've spoken with the NRCC chairman as well as with Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy multiple times about this over the course of the past year, and they're targeting as many as 50-something districts out there across the country that they believe are competitive. There's for instance, one in Oregon that has been long held by Democrats, but President Trump came within 0.1% of beating Hillary Clinton there. There's another one down in Texas that's a district that Hillary Clinton won in 2016 that Republicans feel they can flip back. So if they're able to win some of those seats, as well as a good number of the seats that Democrats control that Trump won those districts in 2016, then there's a really good chance that the Republicans can retake the House majority in November. The vast majority of the establishment media is missing this story. They're not covering this at all. And again, a lot of this depends on how the president does at the top of the ticket.
So in a lot of these districts, and you know, Tip O'Neill said all politics is local, and I think that it is. But how, as you're surveying these various districts and you're talking to candidates in the NRCC and all of that, how much do you think these races will come down to a referendum on President Trump?
I think that'll be part of it. So again, it depends on if the president hits his marks from 2016. So though there's definitely a local component to each of these races. So in the Pennsylvania districts, for instance, there's a lot of angst with Governor Wolf with regard to how he handled the lockdowns. With the Michigan districts, where you guys are, there's a lot of angst with how Governor Whitmer has handled herself throughout the pandemic. In New Mexico, there's a lot of different other local issues. There's, immigration's a big deal there. There's also, again, a lot of pandemic politics going on in different places. In Utah, there's other local factors, but at the same time, there's a definite national referendum element going on here. And again, It's hard to see people split ticket vote. They do that on occasion, but at the same time, it's very likely that if President Trump wins these districts, just like he did in 2016, that the Republican candidates down ticket are also going to benefit from that. So usually the presidential candidate has coattails, right? Like, so people will vote right down the ticket. So if they vote for Trump, Republican, then they're going to vote for the Republican in the Senate race. They're going to vote for the Republican in the House races. Maybe not as high a numbers as they would at the presidential level, but usually enough that it's going to make a difference, especially those districts that President Trump won by 6% or more. So while each of these races is all individual in nature, there's also a national referendum component going on here. And so it does appear, and by the way, we're starting to see polling roll in from a lot of these different districts out there across the country. So whether they be internal or independent polls from either the Republicans or the Democrats in terms of internals that are showing a very close race for the House. So New Mexico's second, which I've mentioned a few times, that one has, we've seen polling that shows it tied. We've seen polling from Utah's fourth, where that one shows it, the Republican Burgess Owens, who's a fantastic black conservative, he's up 8 points on the Democrat challenger.
So as you're talking, I'm just sort of doing the math here. So you said the NRCC is playing in 50 districts, which basically means they're investing time and money. The Republicans need 20, right, to take the majority, and 17 of those districts, President Trump won, Donald Trump won by at least 6 points in 2016. I mean, you look at this math, and it just seems to me if they stick to the facts and they stick to the issues, and you turn out the vote, Republicans stand a very good chance of taking back the majority in the House.
Very, very good chance. And again, a lot of it depends on what the president does at the top of the ticket. And the polling is starting to show these very close races around the country. And so if these Republicans just stick to the program, right, like, and then again, the president delivers at the top of the ticket. And that's the big question, right? You see the presidential race is very much in flux right now. You look at all the polls from battleground states, they're kind of all over the place. The national polls are all over the place. There was a point where Biden seemed to be way up in the presidential race at the national level, but that seems to have really tightened in recent weeks. And so just how the president does is going to really determine how the Republicans do down ticket. They are joined at the hip. They are married. Their outcomes are connected. And so, and the same thing goes for Senate races too, in a little bit slightly different way. But as for the House races, it is very much incumbent upon what happens with the president.
Do you see an enthusiasm gap between the Republicans and the Democrats? I know that you were recently in Pennsylvania with the vice president, and you made some observations to that effect. Matt Boyle, Washington political editor for Breitbart News. Thanks for joining me today.
All right. Thanks, Kyle.
This is the Kyle Olson Show. We'll be right back with Eric Esshaki, a Republican candidate in the 11th Congressional District. Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. Joining me now is the leading Republican candidate in the 11th Congressional District, Eric Esshaki. The 11th includes portions of northwestern Wayne and southern Oakland counties, so the communities of Troy, Livonia, Canton, Novi, Milford, and Waterford, among others. So, Eric, how is your race shaping up?
Well, Kyle, first of all, thank you for having me on the show. It's great to be with you. The race is shaping up great. There's a lot of enthusiasm on the ground. And I will just say this, our Congress is broken. We're facing civil unrest across our country. 31% of our young people under the age of 35 actually believe that socialism is an acceptable alternative to capitalism. And the ideas coming from the left are, quite frankly, bankrupt and silly. They're calling to defund the police. They want to investigate and impeach President Trump for nothing. And I think the people of Michigan, and specifically the 11th district, are quite frankly, they're tired of it. They want to see change, and they want to see someone focus on policy and conservative policies that will continue to improve our economy, increase small business growth. That's a very important part of the district here.
So what would your core focus be?
So we need to focus on the economy first and foremost. I mean, we look at the policies of President Trump on the economy. They've made sense, and quite frankly, they've worked. We've had some setbacks with COVID, but that's all artificial. So we need to continue to focus on smart tax policy. And more importantly, or perhaps equally as important, is rolling back or continuing to roll back all of this needless regulation that's coming from an unaccountable bureaucracy that sits in Washington and has nothing else better to do than come up with this stuff to make themselves relevant.
So your campaign put out a flyer calling one of your opponents, Carmelita Greco, a fake Republican and anti-Trump. Why do you say that?
Well, the reality of it is she's been gone from Michigan for 20 years. She was out in LA hanging out with her liberal friends. She came back to Michigan about a year ago after campaigning for Democrats who actually support Rashida Tlaib. She dresses up like an American flag after hiring an anti-Trump consultant and claims to be the conservative candidate. And I think that this is an important election. And the voters of the 11th Congressional District deserve to know who the best candidate is, who the strongest candidate is to advocate for conservative principles and help President Trump win the state.
So the 11th Congressional District is one of those, there's a list called the Dirty 30. I don't know why they call it that, but that's what they call it. And it's districts that that Democrats hold that President Trump, Donald Trump, won in 2016. And so the 11th district has sort of gone back and forth in terms of political parties. The incumbent is Haley Stevens. Why do you think she is wrong for the district?
Well, look, Haley Stevens is wrong on issue after issue. She votes with Nancy Pelosi 100% of the time after she ran as a moderate. She's anything but a moderate. And then to make matters worse, she votes to impeach President Trump. And the reason she told us was because she didn't like his tweets. That's not what the people of Michigan want to see.
Mm-hmm. And that specifically, if you go back, I mean, that was like in January. And doesn't that seem like an eternity ago? But if you go back to the reasons that the Democrats wanted to impeach him, it was, as you said, because of tweets, or they didn't like things he was saying, or they didn't like his demeanor. But when it came down to it, the whole basis of impeachment was faulty and basically didn't exist. So if the Republicans, and I just talked to Matt Boyle, who's the political editor of Breitbart News, and we sort of walked through the districts that are at play and where the NRCC thinks that they can win. The NRCC is active in 50 districts across the country. They need to win about 20 in order to win the majority. And, of course, yours is one of those. What do you think the agenda would be if the Republicans are able to take back the majority?
Well, first of all, I'll say, the Democrats want to criticize President Trump on his personality. If we're going to talk about personality, we should be talking about Haley Stevens' personality. This is the Congresswoman that went on the House floor with pink gloves, engaging in political theatrics, and getting her own mic turned off by her own party. This is the same Congresswoman that goes to a gun range and starts screaming and admonishing voters, yelling and saying the NRA has to go. So the reality of it is that we can talk about personality, though I'd rather talk about policy. But if we're going to talk about personality, I think that those on the left have a lot to answer for. And I plan on holding them accountable in this race.
Well, and that's a good point. Let's play that clip right now of Representative Stevens on the House floor and the way she was behaving that caused her microphone to be turned off.
I request 30 more seconds because I rise before you adorning these
gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Not for personal tension, but to encourage you to take
gentleman,
this defeat seriously.
I'm going to give you more time.
Right now, to the families.
The gentlelady will suspend. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized. The gentlelady is out of order.
I yield the gentlelady 30 additional seconds.
The gentlewoman is recognized for an additional 30 seconds.
Cause of their servitude, sharing in the profession with those who have not come before you. Similar times of trying medical need, wars and flus pass. You will see darkness. You will be pushed, and our society needs you to stand together at this time. Our country loves you. To our doctors and our nurses, I wear these laces.
The gentlelady's time has expired. The gentleman from Maryland is reserved. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Speaker Pelosi, I think, is playing a huge role in trying to undermine and subvert what President Trump is doing. And in fact, she went to Chinatown in San Francisco in February and said, there's no problem here. People need to come to Chinatown and they need to, eat the food and spend their money. And there's no problem. And any alarmism around the coronavirus is because you're racist, and it's rooted in racism. And yet now she is coming out and she's calling it the Trump virus. So as this all plays out, how do you see what role would you like to play in the Congress when it comes to these issues, and what would your big focus be?
Well, look, that just demonstrates the hypocrisy on the left. It demonstrates that they don't want to have a discussion on policy because they're bankrupt on ideas. They want to appeal to emotion. They want to make things up, and they want to attack President Trump, which is just wrong. When people ask me, how will I deal with those attacks, because they're most certainly coming, I say, when did the Conservative Party lose its backbone? If they're going to attack us, we need to stand up and we need to attack back. We need to point out the flaws in their failed policies. Every policy that Haley Stevens and the left supports calls for bigger government, higher taxes, and that translates into fewer liberties for folks like you and me. It's time to stand up. It's time to start making the arguments based on common sense and logic, something that the left completely lacks.
One of the things that I think the mainstream media completely missed in 2016 was the enthusiasm gap between the Republicans, Trump, and Hillary Clinton and her supporters. And I saw this, well, and that's exactly what I want to ask you, because you're in the Oakland County, Wayne County, Southeast Michigan, where that's a crucial portion of the state in terms of swing voters. So talk a little bit about what you're seeing in your community when you're out talking to people. Is there an enthusiasm gap between Trump supporters and Biden supporters?
I think there definitely is. I think that everybody, even Biden supporters, understand that he's just going to be a puppet for the far left who is controlling the Democratic Party these days. On the other hand, I think people see President Trump, they look at his policies, and they know that they work. We have the lowest unemployment rating before COVID came. We saw record minority employment. These are good things. This is what we need to be focusing on as a country. And that's not where the left is at, unfortunately.
So Eric Esshaki will be on the ballot in the 11th Congressional District in Michigan when we head to the polls on Tuesday, August 4th. Eric, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was great to talk with you.
Welcome back to the Kyle Olson Show. So did you hear earlier this week when House Speaker Nancy Pelosi referred to the coronavirus as, quote, the Trump virus? Listen to this.
Well, I think with the president's comments today, he recognized the mistakes that he has made by now embracing mask wearing, and the recognition this is not a hoax, it is a pandemic that has gotten worse before it will get better because of his inaction. And in fact, clearly, it is the Trump virus.
This, of course, is the same person who went to Chinatown in San Francisco in February and said, come visit. There's nothing going on here. And any alarmism is obviously rooted in racism. So as Speaker Pelosi attempts to blame the president, Michigan State Representative Beau LaFave is attempting to put the blame where it lies, on China. On Thursday, LaFave introduced House Bill 6025, which requires the state treasurer to tabulate the total cost to the state and send a bill to China. So, Representative LaFave, tell me more about your bill.
Well, Kyle, really appreciate the opportunity today. My bill is very, very simple. We're going to add up all of the cost and the extra cost because of the virus and lost revenue, and we're going to send the bill to China.
That seems simple enough. But what? So this week in Lansing, there has been a lot of drama about the budget and the police being defunded, which I want to talk about that in a second. But sort of give an overview about what is going on with the budget in Lansing and what the legislature and the governor are doing to try and address those shortfalls.
Yeah, the legislature has been shut out completely of negotiation since the virus basically got here in Michigan. The governor is using the 1945 statute to become dictator, essentially, and shut the legislature out. I believe that she wanted some political cover for the necessary cuts that are going to have to be made to take up the $2.2 billion shortfall. So she finally decided to let the legislature in, and we got to negotiate this budget. And I'm glad we did. I'm really glad the governor decided to let the representatives and senators have a say at what's going on. And we were able to come up with a balanced budget that got unanimous vote in the House.
And so basically what she did was she at least portions of the budget, she cut through an executive order. It was the state police, the corrections, and Health and Human Services. And then she used federal funds, coronavirus funds that came from the federal government, to basically kind of backfill, as some people are saying, most of those funds. But, basically what happened was you take the state police, for example, and she cut $115 million through executive order, and then $107 million was replaced, which, according to my government school math, is an $8 million cut. But let's take a step back. The whole reason that your bill is being introduced is because of this very discussion, but that this has taken a massive toll on the state economy and, of course, the state coffers from tax revenue. What really hit me with your bill is that this is a bipartisan bill. You have two, at least right now, as of today, you have two Democrats who have signed on as co-sponsors. What is sort of the talk in the legislature about this? Do you think it will pass? Talk more about that.
Yeah, it is a bipartisan bill because here's the deal. When the virus got here, and it was here and we had community spread, I think that Governor Whitmer made terrible decisions. She shouldn't have put people in nursing homes. Democrats think that Trump is nefarious or evil, and there was a ventilator shortage, or whatever, partisan thing we want to discuss. After the virus gets here, it's an election year. We're going to be playing politics. I get that. But nobody should really be disagreeing that it came from the communist Chinese government that lied to the World Health Organization, threw out reporters, and put people on airplanes and sent them across the world while they had a regional lockdown. So it came from the terrible communist Chinese government, and it's their fault that it left Wuhan province. After it got here, we can discuss, who made big mistakes, whether it be nationally or locally. But should be bipartisan agreement that China shares some responsibility for this virus leaving their country in the first place.
Sure. So let's assume that this bill will pass the House and the Senate, and it goes to the governor, and she signs it. What are the steps after that? And realistically speaking, what legal steps can the state of Michigan take to try and recoup some of these funds from the Chinese the communist Chinese government?
Yeah, and I want to be very clear. The people of China are good people. Their government is evil. And they're murdering millions of their citizens through their forced abortions, one China policy, and sterilization of the Uyghurs. So Chinese people are fantastic, but we need to get rid of that repressive government regime they have. But we're going to send them a bill. And somebody asked me the other day, yesterday, and they said, well, China's never going to pay that bill. Why are you going to send them a bill? I said, because I've never gotten paid for an invoice I never sent before. So we're going to send that invoice. And what happens after that? I don't know. I think the international community is going to have some real problems with what happened because of the Chinese covering everything up. I think they're going to be held responsible, hopefully in the international community. But I would like this bill to be kind of, first of all, we don't even know how much this thing cost us economically, monetarily. We know the human cost with 6,000 people dead in the state of Michigan is horrible. And I can't get those lives back no matter how much they pay us. But we also do have an economic loss, and the taxpayer shouldn't have to fit the bill. So let's send that bill over to China. And I've got a couple ideas that I'd rather not say publicly right now, because if I do, the Chinese Communist government can make some early steps to avoid paying this bill. But I didn't introduce this thinking, that it was going to be just a good press release. I've got some ideas of actually collecting on that bill.
Interesting. So let's turn back to the budget and what happened in Lansing this week. So there's a lot of, debate about whether or not the governor defunded the police, the state police specifically. To me, if you look at what happened, she defunded the police, maybe not in the way that people, sort of interpret it in their minds, but I think, she ultimately did. Excuse me. But what people are not really thinking about is that to the Michigan state government, the 2021 starts October 1st, which is less than 3 months away. And the budget, machinations that went on this week are for this fiscal year, not for 2021. And so there's a massive problem looming in 2021, fiscal year 2021. And so my question to the governor's office, and maybe you can shed some light on this, is what's going to happen in fiscal year 2021 when she has just cut $115 million out of the state police. And I know the state police are important to you in the Upper Peninsula, as they are to many rural parts of the state. But where are those funds going to come from to basically replenish the police? Or is this really defunding the police?
Yeah, so obviously the people of the Upper Peninsula, myself, northern Lower Michigan, and across the state don't want to defund the police. Now, I will tell you, if the police were to be defunded in the Upper Peninsula, it's not going to be fun. But we have citizens that are completely and fully armed and willing to defend their property and their neighbor's property.
That's right. Yeah, that's true.
So the Upper Peninsula is going to be fine, but that doesn't mean it's a good public policy. And frankly, it's just very, very rude to do to the good police officers that we have up there. So we'd be okay, but in other parts of our state, that's not the case. And you would see a lot of death and crime, particularly in minority communities who don't deserve anything bad happening to them at all, but they certainly don't deserve to have Governor Whitmer or any other Democrat politician pandering to woke leftists at the expense of minority lives.
Representative Beau LaFave, thanks for joining me today, and please keep me updated as your bill is considered.
Well, I really appreciate it, Kyle. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you so much for joining me today. For more of my work, go to Breitbart.com or find me on Twitter, Kyle Olson 4. You can use the same handle for Parler, Kyle Olson 4, KYLEOLSON 4. This is The Kyle Olson Show.